Hey, welcome back for another battle report. This time it's going to be Empire of Sunstal against Saurian Ancients. So as you can see, I'm playing the army that I did a army discussion video on. The only change is that I changed one of the light infantry units for a unit of knightly orders, just to see how this would play on the table. So just as a quick wrap up, I basically have two griffins. One is a wizard, and the other is an Imperial Prince, so with Light of Sunstal. And then we have a big block of heavy infantry with halberds with an Inquisitor in there, while he normally goes there with a prelate. Some support units, some riders with repeater guns, still some Knights of the Sun Griffin, and then a steam tank to round it out with some support. Now we go to the Saurian Ancient list. So as you can see, my opponent brought a list with actually two Saurian veterans riding around on raptors. And then the rest of the list is a bit geared towards being able to really rush your opponent. So the big block of Saurian warriors with the banner of the Relentless Company, the Raptor Riders, the Rampedon Riders, the Storosaurs, they can all threaten your army already in turn 2. So it's really an offensive army, I would say. But the downside of it is that it's less flexible than most lists that my Saurian Ancient opponent usually plays. But we'll see how it goes on the table. So the deployment type we have was counter thrust, and the secondary objective was capture the flags. So my army has a bit more scoring than his army, so it's a bit of a negative objective for me, I would say. But still, my opponent has sufficient scoring units for me to be able to also get some off the field. So yeah, my opponent has a very aggressive list, and I actually played against a similar list on a tournament once, with actually also my Empire list. But this opponent had an Alpha Carnosaur Warlord, which could even threaten a bit more than the Saurian veterans of my opponent in this game. Yeah, so at the tournament that I played, my opponent surprised me a little bit with this list, and was able to just put the entire list right in my face turn 1, and I couldn't really get out anymore. In this case, I was already looking at the list, and I was like, yeah, banner of the Relentless Company on nearly 30 Saurian warriors. Yeah, you can just, could be able to just push him in my face and force me to come up with an answer. So I didn't really want to give him the opportunity, and in my deployment you can see this a bit. So the first thing I deploy is the mortar in the lake, and then I continue with some riders, so not really giving away where the rest of my army is going to be. And my opponent can't really respond well to my deploys, because yeah, he can't really drop his entire army, because he can't cover the field wide enough to be able to just smash through my lines at any point of the table. And if he's going center, then I can take one of the flanks and build a bit of a castle there. Still with my riders, with my knights, and also Knights of the Sun Griffin, I can delay him a little bit. So it's I would say it's not a good choice for him to drop everything. So yeah, and then at some point I decided to drop everything and take the first turn, mostly because I saw that well, he was deploying some of his monsters, and my steam tank would have a target first turn. And yeah, I think it was the right choice to do, because at this point I got down to putting down choices that would give away where my army would go, because also just the heavy infantry support units, if you deploy one of those, they're quite vital to the functioning of your heavy infantry parent unit. So once you deploy them, it's going to be limited where your parent unit is going to be. So yeah, I just continue deploying everything really. So what I'm doing is, well, what I normally do is to deploy the steam tank on one flank of the heavy infantry to just cover it up. And I decided to put it on the left flank just because there's so many little threats that still do a lot of damage on any of my other units, like the Rampedons, like the Soros Cavalry. Maybe the small monster, I don't really know its damage output. So the steam tank can really zone this left flank, make sure that nothing is gonna happen there. And then I had the Knights of the Sun Griffin. Basically, they were just a spare choice that I still had left over at the end of the deploy. I could have put them all the way on the right, but I felt like then they would be a bit out of play. Or well, my opponent could effectively put him out of play by just deploying his entire army on the left. So I think the deployment in the end went pretty well. And my opponent tried to counter my deployment a little bit in the way that he deployed. But having not the first turn, he can't move up as aggressively as he would want to. So, for example, the Rampedons, they can't really make use of the Vanguard move. Also, while the steam tank prohibits them kind of from going behind my lines. And yeah, this is a bit of a tricky situation for him because my list, whilst it's not a very dedicated gun line, it still puts out sufficient shots against an army that doesn't have any ranged output, to say. So the Reiters, for example, they are very vulnerable, but if the enemy doesn't have any ranged output to speak of, then they can just blast away. So yeah, I guess in this army I have about 40-50 shots at more or less strength 4, most of them, and the Riders have AP2, and then I have the Inquisitor with the repeater pistol. So yeah, he was already a bit scared of my list, and I think it's very rightly so. So right now I'm feeling quite confident about this matchup, and one thing that I did different from normal games is that I put actually both units of Reiters on one flank. This has two consequences. First off, well, they're not as spaced out as I normally deploy them, so normally one of the units would be on the position of the heavy infantry support unit next to the steam tank instead, so that you can basically get anywhere on the field with your Vanguard 24-inch range shot. In this case, I decided to try out just having them on a flank to where they have a lot of space to play really. And I think that in general in the game I did like it, in the sense that you don't have to worry as much about taking panic tests with your other units, whilst they might be minimized and having a BSB in general nearby. Still, stuff can go wrong. So my opponent is planning out his Vanguard move. So at the start of the game I explained to him about my Inquisitor with the repeater pistol, and being able to advance in the unit and then still shoot. And I believe that he forgot about this because he tried to just stay out of sight of the Knights of the Sun Griffin and of the Wizard. But I measure at this moment just the distance of my Inquisitor to the Rampedon Riders, and it's just within 17 inches. So I measured this before giving out orders because for my orders I can actually give the unit +1 advance and accurate, and then giving this unit, the heavy infantry combat unit, accurate, actually helps more in ranged output because of the Inquisitor's repeater pistol than giving it to the crossbowman. So with a 5-inch move I get to a 12-inch distance between the being within 12 inches with the Inquisitor to the Rampedon, so you can shoot in the shooting phase because he didn't march. Otherwise the Knights, they are able to declare a charge on my opponent's Skink Hunters. I saw this angle and it's probably a mistake of my opponent, because it's for me it's a charge that's really nice to have because it takes away one of the units that my opponent could likely use to chaff up my lines. And otherwise, we're just getting ready to brace for impact, really. So the steam tank's just gonna stay where it is and shoot at the Taurosaur on top. Knights of the Sun Griffin, they move up to the point where it's a 13-inch charge for the Saurus Raptor Riders, so that, yeah, they're gonna maybe not want to advance because they have the same movement as my Knights of the Sun Griffin, so I'm just going for a standoff here, because I just want to delay him, basically. I don't necessarily have to get the charge on him, I just want to play safe, get some kills in, and wear him down over time. So I also didn't want to give him any possibility of going for broke and trying to get through, because if he does manage to get a charge on my Knights of the Sun Griffin into his turn 1, then it's going to be trouble for me. So we go to some magic. I'm mostly out of range, so yeah, and I was considering casting some magic on the Rampedons, but that would mean that my Inquisitor is out of range with his pistol. And I was very curious to see what he would do to this unit, and I was also, yeah, mostly that, and I thought that the chances of him doing sufficient damage to the unit to neuter it ineffective was going to be bigger than the Wizard, because of the 3+ armor save of the Rampedon Riders. So my Inquisitor gets to shoot, and he hits 3 times. He wounds also 3 times. No, yeah, he wounds 3 times. My opponent makes 1 save, and then it multiplies into 4 wounds in total. So yeah, that was quite devastating, also for me to see. And then the crossbowmen, they actually managed to put an additional wound still on the remaining Rampedon Rider. So yeah, he's kind of out of the game. And then after we go to the combat against the... first we have the shooting of the Riders against the Saurus Cav, and I also managed to remove 4 of those, so that's also quite consequential. And then afterwards we go to combat against Skink Hunters, and I managed to remove these from the field. So the Knights, once they defeated the Skinks, they were in a bit of a tricky position because my opponent could charge them and then I would flee, but then if I would flee in the position where I am currently at, then I would give a lot of panic tests to the rest of my line. So I decided to overrun, still be able to flee, hopefully just in front of the Riders, being able to rally next turn and go from there. And then it's to my opponent's turn. His remaining Rampedon made a frenzy check and it failed it actually, so it had to declare a charge and didn't make the charge in the end. Then the Taurosaur declared a charge against the Knights, who fled, and they went through my lines, but the BSB and the General, they kept everything in check. And then my opponent is just moving up a bit. So yeah, he's I wouldn't say that he was very comfortable in his position right now. And luckily for him, I don't have the range to charge far and knock out one of his units and then just crash through and go through his lines. But on the other hand, I can his charge ranges aren't that long that he can just move to a position that's very comfortable for him, then next turn charge me and just smash through my lines at any position. And also with Empire, yeah, you have a lot of options. So what you can see now is that I moved forward my heavy infantry, mostly to be able to shoot at the Rampedon unit. If I hadn't had the Inquisitor in the unit, then I probably would have moved up one of the support units more and kept the parent unit a bit behind, so that my opponent could charge in, and then if he doesn't do at least 15 wounds, I'm going to be steadfast on the ranks of my parent unit. Yeah, the kind of tricks that you can pull off with Empire. Yeah, so his magic, I believe, is quite inconsequential. And then one of his kings actually shoots off a ranger of mine, so that's his first blood. neglecting any terrain casualties that my knight suffered so far. And then yeah, that's about it for his turn. So then we go back to my turn. I check again if I'm within range with my Inquisitor and see if what kind of play I want to make this turn. So I feel like the steam tank has to move up to on the left flank to zone a bit more, and I feel that I can remove the remaining Rampadon with my ranged damage output. And the rest, yeah, I'm not too worried about my opponent's charges right now. I think I can still wait a turn before engaging. So I'm just gonna take it a bit easy and set up some defensive lines with some safe positions for my wizard, for my general, and then the riders, they don't really feel the pressure yet of my opponent's units, so they can still just stay where they are and just shoot with their 30 shots at my opponent's army. So yeah, I'm feeling very comfortable. And yeah, I'm really not worried. I have time on my side. Basically, I have still a mortar that can hopefully land a shot on the Saurian warriors. It's going well. It's just going steady. Nothing bad is happening, and it's a very relaxing play for me. The magic phase actually allows me to cast the Scorching Salvo, so hitting each of his units within 24 inches of my mage with a D3+1 strength 4 AP 0 hit, and I believe this one already removes the Rampadon from the field, and just dishes out some random wounds here and there, which I think it's a really nice spell to have on a Griffin based character, just because it also helps in certain matchups really a lot. So for example against beast herds, also against ogres, any of the stuff that doesn't have a lot of armor saves really. So wood elves, other elves, any elves. Yeah, and then yeah, we don't have any combat yet, so it's gonna be my opponent's turn next. My opponent, yeah, I don't know, probably he should have moved up more aggressively in the previous turn, but then he would have had the risk of me charging into his line, so I think it's I struggle to see how my opponent's army should really work in this setup. Because if well, I have a couple of units that can gladly smash through any of his units in one single turn. But also the heavy infantry of mine can smash through his Saurian warriors. Yeah, so it might be that the deployment was a bit off maybe. So maybe he could have used his Saurian warrior block all the way on the left side of the table in this picture, just to push away my Knights of the Sun Griffin and still try to push over there. But the steam tank, it's definitely a problem. And yeah, it's one of these tools that if you have an answer to it, that's great. If you don't, then yeah, too bad. But yeah, most lists, they still struggle with the steam tank. It's, well, 7 wounds with a 1+ armor save is tough to crack for a lot of stuff, even well, mostly because it also just does the 3d3 strength 5 hits back every single turn, and has a strength 3 AP, a strength 2 AP3 breath weapon, I believe. Yeah, so this turn my opponent does go for a couple of charges. So the Skink Hunters, they charge my my Rangers in the flank, and my Rangers don't really want to do anything with this. So then they flee, and then my opponent charges his cavalry against them to make them flee further away, and his Taurosaur charges my Riders, yeah, and they flee. And then actually my general manages to flee from the Riders going through. But my opponent allowed me to keep it still just on the board, because it was, I think it would have been a tight fit to squeeze in the 9 inches of flee distance, but anyway, my opponent said like, yeah, it's within 9 inches, you're fine, so thank you for that. Otherwise, he's decided that he has to find a way to approach my lines, because otherwise it's going to be a bit of a disaster. So he uses his Stygiosaur, and he's going to use his breath weapon to thin out my my ranks a little bit. And I believe he also tried to force an engagement there. And I have a couple of options there still. So the riders on the back, they're still gonna rally, hopefully. So I have 2 units of riders that can shoot at it, which is option 1. Option 2 is the support unit that's standing very close to the water, to charge into it and just hope that, well, anyway, I'll be steadfast, so just that I'll stick with my leadership. And another option is to charge in with my knights that have rallied the previous turn, because I still have a 1+ armor save, so probably not a lot is going to happen. I might reduce my frontage by getting a casualty in there. So yeah, I would be quite comfortable there, because if I'm going to lose the combat, then it's going to be by -1, more or less. So that is the option that I eventually go for. Then the heavy infantry, the parent unit is going to charge the unit of Saurus of 15, because if I can get an overrun, then I go into the flank of my opponent's big unit of Saurian warriors. My opponent, rightfully so, declares a fleet charge, and then my unit redirects against one of the Taurosaurs, the closest one, together with a support unit to get this extra combat rest for the banner and for the 3 ranks of my support unit in a combo charge. They both make it, for which I'm very grateful. The knights, they actually fail their charge against the Stygiosaur. But as I said earlier, not everything is lost through this. My general and the riders, they managed to rally, and yeah, this is what the field looks like now. And well, we didn't remember whether random movement went before or after rallying, so we just didn't know. The steam tank's gonna go into the flank of the Saurian warriors. So even though its center was probably within the front arc of the Saurian warrior unit, its frontage was in the flank of the Saurian warriors, so that's where it goes. The Knights of the Sun Griffin, they move backwards even more, just to make sure that my opponent realizes that they are there, but that not a lot is going to happen for this turn. So I'm opening up the rear of my steam tank to my opponent's character, but I don't really mind, because again I have 7 wounds. I'm gonna probably grind out my opponent that way, because the Saurian warriors are probably not gonna do a lot against my my little tank. Yeah, now we go to magic. I believe it was quite inconsequential this turn, only giving me a 5+ ward save on my heavy infantry parent unit. I should have gone for the reroll to wound, because my opponent has the choice between hitting my parent unit or my support unit, so he can obviously just hit my support unit and not have to face the ward save. So my Inquisitor, he starts to smack on the Taurosaur, and he does 3 wounds or so. The unit actually adds another wound, and then my opponent only manages to do 5 wounds on my unit. So I'm on, in terms of wounds, I'm on a -1, but I have a banner, another banner charge. I have 3 ranks, another 2 ranks, and yeah, so I auto break my opponent, and I managed to get the overrun into the other Taurosaur. So at this point, things are looking pretty grim for my opponent. Yeah, so my opponent declares a charge with his BSB in the rear of my steam tank, and otherwise I don't remember really what happens. Yeah, he's checking out some lines. But we realized, both of us, that at this point the game is pretty much over already. So we actually decide to call it there. So it's a 20-0 win for the Empire of Sunstal. Yay! Yeah, so some thoughts. Yeah, my opponent played a rush list, and yeah, this is what can happen with a rush list if I don't know if it's not properly built or if it was a bad matchup, or as some of you might already know, I'm not really into rush lists, just because it's a very polarized way of playing. So you put it down on the table, you see if it works, and if it works then you win. If it doesn't work, you don't win, but all you do is really just to rush your opponent. It can happen, and I'm not saying that there's no skill required in doing so, because it's yeah, any minor mistake you make, it's gonna be so incredibly important to the outcome of the game. But it's really not my style of play. Probably if someone were to give me a rush list and I would recognize that it is one, then I could, yeah, I could give it a try and see if it works out for me. But this is what can happen with such a list. Still, I hope that you enjoyed this battle report, and well, if you have any comments or if you disagree on our assessments, please comment below, and hopefully see you next time.